Hello viewers, welcome to Mr. Marashani Online Lessons. Today we are going to start our revisions, okay? In preparation for the exam that you are going to write next year. So today we are going to start looking at African history. So the first question that we are going to see, of course, I don't know if you are going to answer my sources, but I don't usually encourage people to answer sources of my sources number one, which is number one of the question paper for African history, which is paper one. So you are going to start answering from number two. Okay, and on your number two, you are going to meet the first question, which is going to ask you about my sources of history. My sources of history. When you are talking about sources of history, we are talking about where we get or obtain historical information. Kwatinowana history, kwatinowana zvakaitika. Remember, history is the study of past events. So where we obtain or where we get what happened in the past, izvo zvatinoshandisa kuti tiwane zvakaitika kare, ndiwo anonzi sources of history. So we have this question here which reads the first question, which reads here: list any 5 sources used to reconstruct Zimbabwe's pre-colonial history. When you are talking about reconstructing, we are talking about rebuilding what actually happened in the past. So the apima sources atinoshandisa muno mu Zimbabwe kuti tikwanise kuvaka zvekare zvakaitika kare, so that we can reconstruct Zimbabwe's pre-colonial history. And the word pre-colonial here, it means before colonization. So we want to know the sources that we can use to obtain information or to obtain history that happened before Zimbabwe was colonized, pre-colonial history. Number one source that we are going to use is called oral tradition. What is oral tradition? This is historical information passed by the word of mouth from one generation to another. Kureva kuti apa ndipo vanhu pavanenge vachitaura mashoko, vachingotaura vasina pavanoverenga, vachishandisa miromo yavo. For example, paunoudzwa ngano and stuff like that. A good example of oral tradition. Historical information passed by the word of mouth from one generation kuenda kune imwe generation. Okay? Then another source of history that we have that we can use to reconstruct or rebuild the Zimbabwe's pre-colonial history is what we call written records. What is the written records? Written records, we are referring to the history on a paper. We are referring to the history on a paper. We are referring to the history on a paper or information on a paper, like what you are seeing right now on your screen. It's written records, okay, which include diaries, textbooks. It also include edited written sources and also unedited written written sources. Ma edited ndo ma textbook ne ma newspaper, but ma unedited ones ndo ma diary, and especially my diaries. Okay. Then number 3 source of history that we have is called archaeology. What is archaeology? Archaeology is just the study of past events or the study of artifacts, or what we call the scientific study of artifacts. Ndiyo yatinoti archaeology. Anditika kuchaka zvinhu zvakangosiyana siyana, sokuti mukaenda pakambogara vanhu, mukasvika paine machoko moti saka pana pambebe paigara teacher, mukasvika paine miseve nemapfumo nechi mototi saka pamwe panapa paigara munhu aiita zvehunting, kureva kuti paigara hunter. Tikasvika isusu sezvatakaita kuGreat Zimbabwe, we went to the Great Zimbabwe and we discovered that at the Great Zimbabwe there was huge bones of wild animals, which shows that the people of Great Zimbabwe, they were involved in hunting, or they practice what we call hunting. And when we enter into the great closure, we discovered that inside there we got what we call carbonated seeds, which becomes a clear evidence that the people of Great Zimbabwe, they also practice what we call crop clout version. Okay, takaenda ko tikaona kuine mapits airadza kuti vanhu ava vaita mining. Tikaenda ikoko tikaona kuine presence of iron spoon, presence of Chinese dishes, and we concluded that as archaeologists, the people of Great Zimbabwe, they were involved in trade, not only trade, but they were involved in external trade, where they trade with the Chinese, where they trade with the Arabs, where they trade with the Phoenicians, where they trade with the Swahili. Why? Because pataka enda pa Great Zimbabwe, we discovered that there was presence of Chinese dishes, and also there was presence of mirrors. Ndiana kanga chuya nema mirrors of Great Zimbabwe, because during that time the people of who lived in Great Zimbabwe, they were not able to make ma mirrors, they were not able to make ma iron spoon, though vanga cook extract ma iron tools, but vanga vasina that technological capability of them making ma iron tools like ma iron spoon. And then another source of history that we have is called linguistic. What is linguistic? Linguistic, we are referring to the study of languages. Patakaenda Great Zimbabwe, and we discovered that the people who were living around Great Zimbabwe and inside the Great Zimbabwe, they were speaking Shona, and we concluded that the Great Zimbabwe therefore was built by the Shona speaking people. So this source of history, it helps us a lot to identify who actually built the Great Zimbabwe. Patakaenda iko hatina kuwana vanhu variko vachitaura Chinese, hatina kuwana vachitaura Arab, but takawana vachitaura Shona. Tikasati saka the Great Zimbabwe was built by the Shona speaking people. And also we have another source of history called rock art. What is rock art? Rock art tiri kudzidza nema paintings aitwa on the rocks, like ma paintings of people hunting, ma paintings of people gathering, which shows that the people of Great Zimbabwe, they also venture into gathering, they also practice what you call hunting. Okay, and also we move on and talk about the last source, which is very, very vital, and this is my favorite. This one is called social anthropology. Social anthropology is the study of the present society, and relating them to the society that lived long before, is the study of the present society and relating them to the society that lived long before. Like tikaenda pa any society, tikawana vanhu vese vachipfeka matrousers, toti saka vana vatete vaipfekawo matrousers. Ndo inonzi social what? Anthropology. Patakaenda kuvanhu vakanga vachigara pa Great Zimbabwe, takasvika tikaona vachiita hunting, takasvika tikaona vachita gathering, takasvika tikaona these people, they believed in polygamous system. These people, they paid lobola in form of cattle or iron tools. Tikaona kuti vanhu ava vachiri kuita inonzi the kuronzera system. Yaiva system yekuti munhu aipawo mombe dzake uyo ochengeta kuti akwanisewo kurima and stuff like that. Patakaona izvo takati saka nevanhu vakagara kudhara pano pa Great Zimbabwe vakanga vachingoitawo hunting, vakanga vachingoita gathering, vakanga vachipractice mafisa cattle or kuronzera system. Ndo inonzi social anthropology. Iyi social anthropology yakangoipira kuti haizonyaso kuti batsira, because you are studying the present society. Obva wati ndo zvaitwa nana mbuya vake. Aiwa. The disadvantage of social anthropology is that history or life or life is dynamic. Okay, life is what? Is dynamic, which means life, it keeps on changing. Haungati wauya kuZimbabwe izvezvi uchishandisa social anthropology owana vanhu vekuZimbabwe vachiti magetsi ari kuenda na4 achidzoka na10, obva wati saka ndo zvaingogara achingoita all along. Aiwa, kune nguva zvakanaka magetsi asingaende. So the main disadvantage of social anthropology is that life is dynamic, it keeps on changing. So as a result, if you rely on this source alone called social anthropology, you can obtain what you call distorted historical information or false historical what? Information. Okay, then question B that they can ask you, it says here, describe the advantages and disadvantages of using these following sources in the reconstruction of history of Zimbabwe. So my sources atapiwa kuti utiudze ma advantage nema disadvantage acho. Tapuwa one oral tradition, tikapuwa written record. So iwewe unofanirwa kutipa ma advantages, unofanirwa futi kutipa ma disadvantages of using the following sources of history. So tichatanga kuita inonzi oral tradition. Zvakakosha kuti pauri kunyora essay yako utange nekudefine kuti what is oral tradition. Izvo zvichatibatsira kuziva kuti munhu uyu ari kuziva nezvaari kutaura nezvazvo, handiti? Right? So the first point yaunofanirwa kunyora paoral tradition is to define what is oral tradition. Obviously is the historical information passed from one generation to another by the word of mouth, or through the word of what? Through the word of mouth. Then the first advantage of using oral tradition is that it is less expensive. It is less expensive as compared to other sources of what? Of history. Hautenge ukadangodzwa ngano unoenda unambuya vako kuudza. Kudaudza kuti mhuri yedu yakabva kupi. Haumbotenga unongoenda utogara utoda se utotanga kuudza. So it is less what? Expensive. Then another advantage of using oral tradition is that there is the room for discussion between the storyteller and the listeners. There is the room for discussion between the storyteller and the listeners. Kana tichiti there is the room for discussion, tiri kutaura kuti kudii? Tiri kuti isusu pane mukana wokuti those who are listening to the one who is telling the story, they can ask questions. Why? Because vanhu vari kuonana. So there is room for the storyteller and the listeners to discuss. There is room for discussion. Ndizvo zvimwe zvakanakira oral tradition. Zvasiyana written records ekungoti uringoverenga zviri papo, you have to believe wanyora wacho hapo. So apa pane room for what? For discussion, which means unogona kubvunza the storyteller what he or she is trying to say, right? Another advantage is that it is easy to understand as it uses local what? Language. Uchaona kuti panoshandiswa oral tradition kazhinji kacho vanoshandisa mutauro waunoziva. They use local language. For example, if you are going to get information through oral tradition in Zimbabwe, you are going to get that information in Shona or in the language that you understand. So it is easy to understand oral tradition. Why? Because it uses the language that you understand, or it uses the local language which is common to everyone. Okay? And also another advantage of oral tradition is that it caters for the illiterate society or the illiterate society. Right? But it caters for the illiterate society. Illiterate society, those society is nakudzidza, those who don't know how to read and write. Saka iva vachadzidzawo history, uye vachazivawo history through this source code or what? Tradition. Why? Because inoshandisa language yaunogona. Unogona kuona kunyora, but kungonzwawo shona unoita sei unonzwa. Then it gives clear and visual impressions of what was actually happened in the past, or what was actually happening in the what? In the past. Okay? I think Pai correct one. So it gives clear and visual impressions of what was actually happening in the what? In the past. Izvi tiri kuti inopama pictures panenge pachitsanangurwa. Munhu ari kutsanangura ndiye aivapo, anonyasotsanangura achiita ma-action and stuff like that. But textbook haripe in form of video like that. But imanje oral tradition inopama clear pictures, and also zvichakonzeresa clear understanding and makes this source being easy to understand. Right? And also another point, that it provides accurate names of rulers, e.g. that of the Mtapa state. So we got to know that the king of the Mtapa state, or the founder of the Mtapa state, was called Prince Nyatsimba Mutota, who migrated from Great Zimbabwe going to Adande area looking for salt. Takazviziva through inonzi oral tradition. So yakanakira kuti inotipa provider accurate names of the rulers. And also oral tradition inotiudza about the origin of various states. Amene ndakaisiya sepo indi yacho pandainyora manotsa. Inotiudza about the origins of various states, like the state of Great Zimbabwe. Takaziva kuti yaka image because of what? Takaziva through oral tradition. And also the origin of the Mtapa state takaziva through what? Oral tradition. Then we have my disadvantages of oral tradition. Number one is that it is a debt blind. Oral tradition. Number one, it is a debt blind, which means it failed to give accurate dates. Kana tichiti date blind kuti haikwanise kupa ma-accurate dates, munhu anokanganwa. Munhu anokanganwa. So it is a date blind. Why? Because it failed to give accurate dates. Why ichifaila kutipa accurate dates? Because human mind have got the tendency of forgetting things. Pfungwa dzemunhu dzine mukana wekukanganwawo. Number 2 disadvantage that it lacks chronology. And when we are talking about chronology, we are talking about order of events. Munhu anongotsanangura semawiro azviri kuita musoro make kunyangwe zvisina order. So another disadvantage of oral tradition is that it lacks chronology, which means it lacks order of events. Right? Information can be biased, or it can be distorted, or it can be unreal, or it can be false. Why? Because of exaggeration. What is exaggeration? When we are talking about exaggeration, we are talking about you as the storyteller going beyond the truth. Kusvika pachokwadi wobva wadarika, ndo inonzi exaggeration. So as a result, tichaona kuti isusu tinosara neinformation which is not real, which is biased, which is distorted, which is false. Why? Because vari kutaura, vari kuwedzerera, vari kuexaggerate. Madudika. So sometimes people, they exaggerate. Why? Because they want the audience to be impressed. Okay? Then another disadvantage is that there is loss of information due to death of people with historical information. So uchaona kuti tikarely ne oral tradition, vanhu vanenge vane information yacho vanofa. So tichava ne loss of what? Information, especially due to what? To death of people with historical information. Why tichiti pachava ne loss of information? Because there is no individual under the sun that can survive for more than 12 generations. Nowadays, there is no individual that can survive for more than what? 12 generations. And the generations something like 20 years to 30. Okay? So Diana no survivor for more than 12 generations. Akuna. So obviously, tikaramba tichi rely on oral tradition as a source of history. Teachers suffer from loss of information due to death. Then also it led to distortion of history because human mind have got the tendency of forgetting things. This one, okay? The information can be one-sided. Kurati inogona kunge ichingofavor one side chete. As the storyteller select what he want the audience to hear and leave out what he doesn't like. Do you know what? Even guys, I love you because you always you always go through my social media, my social media apps. And our Facebook, and our WhatsApp and stuff like that. You can see somebody narrating a story. So interesting. You can see somebody narrating a story of what happened in the past. So as he or she is going to narrate this story of what really happened in the past, you can see that there is one-sidedness of that story. The storyteller will tell about what is good about him or her. Okay? But munhu ari kunarita, suppose munhu ari kunarita about the abuse that I went through. You see, that's what they say, the abuse that I went through. Oh God, the abuse that I went through. Chicha mboita to abuse. Haataure that part. Anongotaura, I was abused. I was this. Vanhu vaindidai. Iwe waizodanzo zvaita sei. That part haibude. Ndo zvakaipira oral tradition. Information that you are going to obtain from oral tradition, it can be one-sided, and most of the time it comes favoring the one who is telling the story. You see? So, moving on to the advantages, disadvantages. Right, moving on to written records. Unotanga watsanangura chichi no the written records. Written records, it's information written on a paper. No, you know the written records. And then let's move on and talk about the advantages. Number one advantage in the written records is that it provides accurate dates. It provide accurate dates. It provide accurate dates of what? Of events. Why did it not provide accurate dates? Because izaitika musi wakati, vachinyora maaccurate what dates. Then another advantage of written records, which is information written on a paper, is that the evidence is durable, which means it can last for a long period of time. Which means this book, right? The evidence is durable, which means it can last for a long period of time. But last for a long period of time if kept safe. If kept what? Safe. Don't know. If kept what? Safe. So the information can last for a long period of time if kept safe. If kept safe. So uchiona can read textbook. I have this book that I wrote, Irorakan's Stomach of History. This one. This book rikanyasochengetwa zvakanaka. Rino last of all indinofandorisiya vana vangu vofavorisiya if this book is kept safe. So the evidence that is in written form can last for a long period of time if kept what? If kept safe. Then another advantage is that it cannot suffer from memory loss. Kana wakaverenga pa page 65 ichikudza kuti photosynthesis is a process whereby green plants make their own food, and kana kuti wakaverenga pa page 66 vachikudza kuti German drafted a war plan called the Schifflin plan, and according to German drafting the Schifflin plan, she was saying she want to attack France through Belgium and turn back to Russia in 6 weeks. Iyo information haumbofa wawana textbook chiri ndakangamwa zvawakaverenga nezuro. Why? Because written records in advantage kuti it cannot suffer from memory loss, which is now different from oral tradition, because oral tradition nanokangamwa, because human mind have got the tendency of forgetting things. Then another point there is that the names of places and people are real. When it comes to written records, the names of places, number one, the names of people are real, though the way words are spelled may not be accurate. For example, my historic document that contains Chaka and Shaka. So zita ripo nderengoti Chaka ndizoka. So spelling ndinozosiyana, but my names in my places, they are what? They are real. Although spelling ichizosiyana, but my names, they are real. Then moving on to the disadvantages of written records. The disadvantages, the question can come and say, give us the demerits. Okay, when they say give us the demerits of written records, they are referring to the disadvantages of using written records, or they are referring to the non-benefits of using written records. Okay, then number one disadvantage of using written records is that you cannot ask a written source. No problem. You cannot ask a written source some questions. For example, a textbook. You can't ask. You never ask a written source. Okay? Which is different now from oral tradition where we can ask the what? The storyteller. Then information given may be shallow, as the history given may be selective. Oh, but information I know book yakanyora, it can be shallow, especially vanyori book vanonyora zvavanoda vosiya zvavasingadi. So as a result pamusoro pechinu unosara uine information iri limited. Why? Because vanyora zvavanoda, information is selective. The history given, as the history given may be what? Selective. Kuna vano selecta zvavanoda. Right? Information may be interpreted wrongly due to absence of the author. Do you know this word called, or there is this book which was written by Hitler when he was in prison. This book was called Mein Kampf. Mein Kampf. Mein Kampf. Mein Kampf. Others, they may interpret the meaning of Mein Kampf differently, but the actual meaning of Mein Kampf, it means my struggle. So as he was in jail, he wrote his book, which becomes the Nazi Bible as he was campaigning, which was called Mein Kampf, meaning my struggle. Why? Because he wrote that book whilst he was in jail. Okay? Or if you read about the background of a guy called Benito Mussolini, you can hear that he started running newspapers called Avant, which means forward. He started by running the newspapers called what? Avant, meaning forward. And he resigned from running Avant, meaning forward, and he started writing newspapers called Il Popolo di Italia, which means the people of Italy. Il popolo di Italia, which means the people of Italy. So kana vasina kutiudza the interpretation or the meaning of this name of the newspaper called Il popolo di Italia, vanhu vanointerpreta differently, and as a result you are going to obtain false information, or the information that you are going to get, it becomes wrong due to different what interpretation. Izvo zvakonzerwa ne-absent of the what of the author. Kuda akanyora bhuku atofa ashaika, saka hapana anozotiudza. Let's move on and talk about part C. Do you know what? Paramuchanyora very soon history, you are going to see this question coming. Either vachabvunza about my merits, the demerits, oral tradition, kana kuti written records, kana kuti archaeology. Regarding what a bit on archaeology. Archaeology that is study of what? Is the scientific study of artifacts, and they use why it is called the scientific, because there is use of what you call carbon dating. Carbon dating is something that predict deaths as it exchange carbon dioxide with the what, with the atmosphere. That is carbon dating. So what are the advantages of archaeology? Let me just shed more light on that one. Number one advantage of archaeology is that it provides tangible evidence. Ma artifacts that you tell the story now, it gives us also accurate dates. It tells us about the economic activities of various states. Those three advantages are now. Then my disadvantages of archaeology is that number one, uya atinenge tina wacho ma artifacts atinenge tawana, ma past remains atetawana, angawa ma bonzo, angawa ma pfumo, angawa ma spears, angawa ma iron tools and stuff like that, are silent witness. No problem. No disadvantage kutanga. Archaeology, it gives us silent witness. My artifacts are silent witness, cannot tell us anything. If you are going to find a chalk, it's not going to tell us that ndaishandiswa teacher. No, koka na yenyo sapa tax shop kuti sugar $2.50, chaka $3. So teacher ona kuti disadvantage archaeology is that it provides my artifacts which are a silent witness. Number two is that my artifacts can be interpreted differently by different archaeologists. And when you check the history of the Great Zimbabwe, as we are looking at the structure of the magnificent structure of Great Zimbabwe, we can, many archaeologists, they give different interpretation concerning the conical tower. If you check the conical tower, other historians, other archaeologists, they said the conical tower was a symbol, or it reflects a religious symbol, or it was used for religious, okay? When the people, they used it to climb that conical tower, when they climb the conical tower, they want to feel close to Mary. And other archaeologists, they said, because of the shape of the conical tower, maybe the people of Great Zimbabwe, they built that conical tower as a way of showing male fertility, because as you check the structure of that conical tower, it seems it looks like a male reproductive organ, okay, the penis, okay. So vari kuti iwo kumira kwa church chakaita, it represent male fertility, and I agree with them 100%, because these people, they believe much in polygamous system. So I think that one it's valid. But one or two, it was a religious symbol where they climb and they want to feel close to man. So no archaeology. So those know linguistic, you have to know, and stuff like that. Rock art, you also have to know. Then moving on to part C. This is part C. How useful oral tradition is in the reconstruction of the history of Zimbabwe. Explain your answer. So pavari kuti how useful. Oh, how useful. Iwo sekuona kwako unoona kuti oral tradition iri kutibatsira papi, ndo zvarongobvunza kuti oral tradition iri kutibatsira papi nepapi pa reconstruction of the history of Zimbabwe. Iri kutibatsira papi nepapi, iri kutibatsira papi nepapi. Right. So iwo chekutanga on your greater extent, you are going to tell us the usefulness of oral tradition in the reconstruction of Zimbabwe's pre-colonial history. What is the usefulness of oral tradition? When we are talking about the usefulness of oral tradition, we are talking about the advantages. the merits, the benefits of using what? Oral tradition. So that's why I answered this question like this. Oral tradition proved to be useful. No, my answer went, oral tradition proved to be useful in reconstructing the history of Zimbabwe in that it can be used in communities that do not have written what? Documents. No advantage ekutanga. 2, listeners can ask the storyteller questions. There is room for discussion. 3, it gives the Zimbabwean people's point of view. Kurati imuchidzo wame mchiona kuti zvinoita here munhu anoti akadonha pamawere ndobva asvika anambochoka. So munopawo muono wenyu kuti zvinoita here izvozvo. So it gives the Zimbabwean people point of what? Of view. And another usefulness is that it is less what? Expensive. So ndapama points mangani? Ndapama points 1, 2, 3 and 4. So to balance this one, this is my greater what? My greater extent. Okay? This is my great extent. So this one, however, is my lesser extent. Always try to maintain this one. Okay? So I put 5 points here. Then here on the other side, my points are less than kwandaisa ku great extent kuratidza kuti iriwo are less. So ndakuskipa line note. However, other sources like archaeology and written documents proved to be useful in reconstructing the history of Zimbabwe. So ndakutaura kuti aiwa kunyangwe zvazvo oral tradition, andakuti oral tradition is not important. Ndiri kungoti kunyangwe zvazvo oral tradition yakakosha. However, kune mamwe masources akakoshesesa pakuitwa reconstruction of Zimbabwe's what? Colonial history. And for example, we have archaeology which gives accurate dates. Saka ndenda kuti archaeology ndopa zvayakanakira, it gives us accurate dates. And through the use of carbon dating. And we have another source called the written records, which provide real names of places and the what? And the rulers. So handina kunoti, because many students they contradict themselves paku answer mapati C. Andika mapati C kana uchi answer uchinda however. Hauti did not. Hauti oral tradition is not useful. No. Unongotaura kuti however kune mamwe masource ari usefulness. Ari useful. Akaita sana archaeology nana written records. Wapedza obva watipa usefulness yechi ye archaeology. Or that archaeology is useful. Why? Because it gives accurate dates. Wapedza what about more so written records also they are useful. What about the usefulness yechi ye oral tradition? For example, it provides real names of places and rulers. Wapedza wa answer part C yako. Right? E question ni either writer say uri kuto answer this question because iri kuuya. Itarise pa number 2. Itarise pa number 2. Number 2, 3 ndo pairi kuuya pa. So this question I hope you are going to answer it correctly. Right. Then on the next lesson, I am going to talk a bit about the Great Zimbabwe.